Hello, my name is Tracy Truex, and I am here to discuss my action research part two. um, the purpose of this research was to investigate levels of student motivation in a remote learning environment. And I have been teaching remotely since the beginning of the school year because of the coronavirus crisis. And so it became really important to me to figure out or to identify correlations and patterns that might explain levels of engagement and then use the data collected to make instructional adjustments. I feel like engagement is kind of the first step in learning, and this was such a unique situation to be a part of that motivation and engagement really started to drive my curiosity um, for a variety of reasons, which I'll get to. So the problem statement was actually born from the Zoom room. So I teach synchronous sessions in a block scheduling environment. So I see students 3 times a week, and I see them in a Zoom room. And my Zoom room looks a lot like the room that you see on the screen there. We do not actually get to force our kids to put their cameras on for many different social emotional reasons. So a lot of my students are joining my class via Zoom with their blackened screens and their mics off. And so I started to observe some patterns that made me kind of scratch my head a little bit. I started to notice that students were struggling with engagement both inside and outside of the classroom. And I also started to notice that uh, the lack of outside engagement in the classroom was impacting the way that students were learning inside of the classroom when they had their time with their teachers in their Zoom room. This is especially relevant and important for the class that I chose to focus on, which was my AP Human Geography class. In this class, which is very content heavy, I had to flip the classroom, and so the flipped lectures were designed to give students the information, and then the class activities were designed to provide students with opportunities to apply the information and to practice the necessary skills. So I noticed that there was some kind of a disconnect there. And so I really wanted to figure out what was going on in terms of engagement. Now, I really like this quote because I think it encapsulates my interest in the topic, and that is in my research, I should say, and that is individuals need to be willing to participate in the learning process. That is to say, they need to be motivated and use learning strategies effectively, because without being able to do that, their learning was going to be negatively impacted. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And so I really started to wonder, like, in this environment, remote learning was not a choice by these students. It was a conclusion that was made on their behalf. So I was wondering if students even had the tools to engage effectively in online learning. And so I had lots and lots of questions, but I narrowed it down to two. The first question being, how does a remote learning environment impact student engagement? And then in what ways can teachers adjust instructional strategies to promote engagement in a remote or hybrid concurrent learning environment? Okay, so the literature was actually really helpful, particularly my third article, which I'll get to in a minute. But the first article, Enhancing Student Interactivity in an Online Environment, Darrington, Berryhill, and Swafford found that students demonstrate more positive attitudes and higher levels of performance when online classes are highly interactive. This seems to relate to engagement in general, be it inside or outside of the classroom, but it was important for me to consider how interactive I was actually making my classes and how I could do that better, and that maybe that would increase student motivation. The second article I read was by Jared Borup. His article titled Teacher Perceptions of Learning Engagement at a Cyber High School looked more at the teacher perspective. And what I found most important in this article was a summary about how building relationships is still critical. And so, in a remote learning environment, it is challenging to create a classroom environment that's conducive to learning, where everybody feels comfortable and willing to take academic risks, but it's possible. This article highlighted, though, that it does take a certain amount of uh, detective work to do this effectively, because you don't want to create a situation where online bullying could happen, because that actually decreases engagement rather than increases it. So it does the exact opposite of what a teacher is hoping to do. And then finally, and this is the one that I thought was most relevant to my question, in an article by Emil Toren, Online Distance Learning in Higher Education, E-Learning Readiness as a Predictor for Academic Achievement, even the title of this kind of piqued my interest a little bit, because I hadn't thought of motivation and engagement as being connected to the concept of like e-learning readiness. And so the article points out a lot of different factors that they tried to see in terms of readiness, what most impacts engagement. And what they found was that e-learning readiness is most dependent upon self-directed learning and intrinsic motivation. And so as a result of this literature study, I designed my entire survey, which I'll talk about in a moment, that looked at student self-efficacy, self-directed learning, intrinsic motivation, like it says on the screen. And then I added some questions about executive functioning as well, so that I can see where my students were in their readiness. So as mentioned, I'll get to the data, how I collected the data, but most of my data was descriptive in nature. And the group that I focused on were 9th and 10th graders. So this is a multiple grade level class in AP Human Geography. And almost all of the data that I collected was quantitative, or at least the data that I analyzed. There was some qualitative data as well, but I used it for my own benefit and not for this research. And the way in which I collected the data was I used Edpuzzle, which is a Web 2.0 tool that's very cool, actually. So I created video lectures for each of the learning targets that students are responsible for in this AP Human Geography class. And then I uploaded it to Edpuzzle. And Edpuzzle actually tracks how long students watch the video, as well as how many times they might rewind a certain section of the video. So I could see how students were actually engaging with the lectures. Are they passively just listening? Are they actively taking notes? And so it gave me a lot of information just with a quick upload. And then I also created a student survey, like I just mentioned. And then the last data point was from multiple choice objective progress checks, because I wanted to see how much my students were learning and if there was a correlation between engagement in the outside class activities and then the actual demonstration of learning in the multiple choice objective progress checks. So I really, I kind of am a data nerd, so I really liked the process of analyzing the Edpuzzle lectures and the student. I like the whole process of analyzing the data. So the Edpuzzle lectures gave me some interesting data. So first things first, I found that only 24% of my students completed lectures prior to synchronous sessions. So what this means is students, basically this was the homework. So if we're meeting in class on Tuesday, then your homework Monday was to learn about the topic so that we can apply your learning in the next class. So only 25% of students actually did this in a timely fashion so that they were ready for the application and skills practice. There was evidence that students went back. So I had 43% of students who completed all of the learning target lectures for the unit that we just finished. But I was wondering, like, okay, so how effective was in-class time for you if you didn't know the content that you were supposed to be applying? So again, more questions. 13% of students missed at least one, but many of those 13% missed more than one of the Edpuzzles completely. So they're just missing out on the learning. And then 90% of, so there was one day that I gave students in-class time to complete the Edpuzzle lecture. And when they had the in-class time to do it during the synchronous session, 90% of students completed the Edpuzzle lecture. But again, I kind of wondered then, what did the rest of the 10% of the kids who were in class do when I gave them time? So really a lack of engagement when they're given time to do homework during class and then choose not to do it. And then the student survey, I'm just going to share the student survey results with graphs. So, and I'm going to share the results of the things that I think were most important for my research. So the first question I looked at was how many students have difficulty maintaining focus on activities that take a long time to complete. And the way in which the survey broke down was I didn't give kids an option of neutral. So they could strongly agree with the statement, they could agree with the statement, they could disagree with the statement, or they could strongly disagree with the statement. So that's what the 1, 2, 3, 4 categories refer to, forcing the kids to either agree or disagree with the statement to some degree. So in this particular case, there was like 58, almost 60% of the students said that they struggled to maintain focus on activities that took a long time to complete. And I didn't differentiate between in-class or out-of-class activities, but I know that I see evidence of this during in-class activities. So I am assuming that the same thing happens in out-of-class activities as well. Next, students identified, the question is, when I struggle with something, I feel like I can identify what went wrong. Now, a vast majority of the students can identify what went wrong, so I was really interested in those students that couldn't. So I had 25%, so a quarter of my kids, when they weren't performing very well, couldn't articulate why. And that's a problem because I don't know how to help. They don't know how to ask for help if they don't know what's going wrong. And so that makes me think, are they shutting down? Are they quitting on me? And so again, the data was important to me. If lectures are too long, so this is specifically referring to the Edpuzzle lectures. So if lectures are too long, I can lose focus and my learning is negatively impacted. And again, sort of a, a majority of the kids. So you have 59, almost again 60% of the kids. So correlating with the last question that I asked about just length of activities more generally, said that they, maybe they start strong and then they just lose interest. And so that was important for me to note as well. And then as a result of that last question, I asked kids to tell me, like, what is the ideal length of time? Like, where do you think you're maximally engaged? And 66% of the students said between 10 and 15 minutes. Another just sort of overarching question that I was curious about, because again, the situation of remote learning is very different for students, especially students that don't choose to do this. I know that there are some high schools that are online where students can actually enroll in an online high school. And I feel like engagement in an online environment in that case might be very different than when students don't get a choice. So in this question, I learned that uh, again, like we're almost at 60, over 60% of students say that remote learning has made just learning in general more difficult for them. And I was considering students' age as well. I mean, some of my students are freshmen, and this is how they're transitioning to high school. And so I would imagine that this is a very unique and challenging situation for them. So it's my job to figure out how to make it better. The progress checks were a little less helpful. I had to dig a little deeper to find any correlations because the correlations were really hard to identify. In other words, there were students that completed all of the Edpuzzles that didn't do well on the learning progress checks. And then there were students that missed some that did very well. And so how helpful this was as a general overview, like I didn't get much. But when I dug a little deeper, I did find out that 91% of students who earn less than a 70% average on the progress checks agreed that longer lectures negatively impact learning. And then I also found that students earning higher than an 80% demonstrates high levels of self-directed learning and executive functioning skills. So those are the students that demonstrate sort of an e-learning readiness. And I'm looking at the other groups of students that may need some additional support. So my goals. And so my action plan goals are pretty straightforward, I think. To increase level of engagement on asynchronous work, including both flipped classroom lectures and learning target multiple choice checks. I also think that it's important to identify students that are really lacking in motivation. I want to target that group of students in particular to meet with them using office hours to mirror sort of a blended learning environment. So I'm inviting certain students to office hours so that we can work more like one-on-one or a smaller learning environment to really help meet their needs. And then I thought it would be really important at this point to establish two-way supportive communication between parents and teachers and also including students in those emails. Now, the way in which I plan to measure these goals are with a few objectives. So those learning target checks are a non-negotiable. I want 100% of my students completing those learning target checks. We stopped giving multiple choice tests because we couldn't maintain the integrity of the exam, and we couldn't really monitor if kids were just looking up the answers. And so the multiple choice tests are incredibly important because students in an AP class need practice taking multiple choice tests because that's the test in May, 50% writing, 50% multiple choice tests. So that was a non-negotiable for me. Number two is to increase student engagement with online lectures prior to synchronous lessons by a factor of 75%. So I wanted to see 75% improvement in students' engagement with online lectures. And I'm jumping around just a little bit, and one of the ways that I hope to do this is to decrease the lectures to between 10 and 15 minutes. So I'm honoring what the kids said was their ideal time for remote learning lectures. Now, I said 75% because there are some concepts in my class that I just can't shorten. They just are more challenging and I might need more time, but I want to at least 3/4 of the lectures I want to keep between 10 and 15 minutes. And even that if that means like breaking up the learning target into multiple days, I'm going to figure out a way to do that. And then 3 and 4 sort of correlate together as well, to meet with at-risk students during office hours for as long as necessary and providing biweekly parent updates on engagement that occur both inside and outside of the class. So specifically relating to this targeted group of kids. And then finally, because these are your high performing kids that are really super grade motivated, one way that I thought I could increase engagement in the online lectures was to collect evidence of note taking for 50% of the lectures. So if there's 8 over the course of the unit, I was going to randomly choose 4 and have kids upload their notes or at least a picture of their notes and then give them points for that. Because as of yet, I haven't been grading them on their engagement on the lectures, but I do want to see their notes anyway to see how well they're learning or engaging with the materials in an active, or are they just being passive and letting this stuff play in the background and hope that it just sinks in. Overall, I have to say that I found this entire course to be really valuable during this particular time of my teaching career. I've always believed that using data to drive instructional decisions is really important and just makes for good teaching. But using inquiry, asking very specific questions, and then collecting data just on that question makes me feel like I'm actually doing something that can help my kids be better and to perform better in a situation that is a challenge for all of us. And so I really enjoyed the process and I'm not stopping. I'm still collecting data and I'm still trying to adjust instruction as I continue to move through the rest of this semester. References, because I forgot last time, and that is it.